meeting. I am Roland Vogel, Executive Director of CodeX. We have two presentations for you today. We have John May, the CEO of Scopus Labs, and Professor Goodenough, who is also a CodeX affiliate faculty. They will provide us with an update on what Scopus Labs has been up to. And then we have Samantha Tions, who's a fellow in our Center for the Law and the Biosciences here at Stanford Law School, who will talk about the use of NLP to inform innovation policy. So, two fantastic presentations coming up. We have an hour for presentations and discussion. Before we get started, does anyone have any news to report? All right, you can use the chat function or just unmute yourself if you want us to hear you. All right, great. Well, then let's get started. John and Oliver, are you there?
Yes, we are both here. But...
You are, wonderful. Can you turn on your camera so we can see you? There you are. Hey, Oliver, good to see you.
I think John may be off camera, but we'll have his sound. I get to play do the play-by-play, and John is the color commentary today. So
wonderful. Okay, great. So so Oliver and John, both co-founders of Scopus Labs, and we heard early on in the when the company was still called PredictGov. I think that's when the last time when we got an update from you. So we're excited to get an update now, and I'll just turn it over to you, Oliver.
Thank you so much. Let me do the screen share if I may.
Yeah, please leave some time for folks to ask questions. So.
Yeah, I think we're going to be hopefully relatively condensed in our presentation today.
Good.
So thank you so much for having John and me. As mentioned, John is our CEO and founder, and I'm a co-founder and also a director for Scopus Labs. As Roland said, we were here originally as PredictGov. I won't go through the evolution away from that, but prediction in the government field is still one of our principal targets. But as I think you'll see, we've expanded a little bit. The core business that we have is still similar to what we've had before, that we're building proprietary natural language processing and traditional metadata-based representations of proposed legislation and regulation. This is the sort of the step one in what we're up to. We're currently targeting federal legislation and regulation and executive action. We are building currently into some of the U.S. states, particularly California and New York. But part of what our starting point is to create a representation, a usable representation of each one of these acts or regulations that includes both its own content, but also metadata factors like who's introducing it, who's controlling Congress, who's the president, as well as other factors that our experience has shown play into being useful data for analyzing and understanding what the climate is within which that legislation is being presented. Second step is that we've been building proprietary representations of public companies, also sectors, other economic actors. Here again, this is proprietary, so I won't go into too much detail, but we take a lot of data sources around what a company is up to, what it's doing, what it's concerned with in the legislative and regulatory world, a lot of publicly available data, and mashing that together to create a representation of these companies and other actors. And then we use those two elements to predict first the passage or adoption of the proposed legislation or regulation. In the regulatory field, it's a bit more straightforward because lots of the regulatory proposals eventually do become law, but the legislation not so much. Then we also predict who it may affect. Again, now running that data up together in a machine learning style process with the data, with the representation we have of the companies and other sectors, and to link who is likely to be affected by it, and will that effect be positive or negative, help or hurt. Now, I think one of the things that sets us apart in all this is that these predictions scale across a very large number of targets. We've got all U.S. publicly traded companies at the moment, and all U.S. federal proposed rules and legislation, and we're updating it basically at least daily to find correlations, find those predictions that we're talking about. Could a human who is very knowledgeable in the field make a prediction that would be equal to ours, or perhaps even a little better? The answer is of course, but no human and no existing group of humans could achieve the predictive success across the scales that we're talking about in these. And the final stage in the business is then using and making these predictions available in some way that is a viable business proposition. So that is our core business. Are there? And by the way, jump in with questions if you've got as we go along. John, would you comment on any of that before we go on here to the next slide?
Well, we can just see if there's any questions around if we want to go into any details on that.
Okay. My screen share. Roland, if you can be a question arbiter, if there are folks who have questions, please jump in and let us know. So
no questions thus far, but yeah, okay. Please.
So that's the course. That's a summary of what we're up to. That's now. What have we been up to in the past year? This is an update. We've talked at least once, and I've updated a little more here at CodeX as we go forward. What have we been up to last year? We closed the seed round, which is always a nice thing to do. Our total funding to date from that and predecessor rounds we've had more than 4 million raised. So we've had quite a decent capital base to build from. We've further developed and refined our data sets and analytics. They were good 12 months ago. They're better now. We have a program of continually updating our approaches on these things, and so we have got an even better set of predictive tools, we feel. And then we've developed 4 channels of delivery. I was seeing in the chat. Like to ask a question of how you handle legislation versus regulation. Let's get back to that in just a moment if we can. We'll come back to that, how we handle regulation versus legislation. First of all, we've developed, we have some free channels, free public service channels. We have certainly, I think it's fair to say, our more entry-level predictions about adoption. We have make available as a data stream to GovTrack, which is a public service, a government tracking and a legislative tracking website. We've contributed to with a COVID policy tracker. We have turned our analytics over to the public with respect to enactments involving COVID. So we have some public service and free channels that we power. Second delivery channel is lawyers, companies, and policy professionals. Basically, folks interested in specific instances of this bill, that bill, this company, that company. The direct applications of these things to companies and predictions about enactment. So again, we have lawyers, companies. That we've been distributing that principally through a collaboration with Westlaw. Westlaw, we power a few Westlaw services in this. They handle that in the distribution. I see there's another chat question. What is the proprietary distinctive nature of the NLP models used? Are these adaptable to other use cases? Let me accumulate these just a moment again. Let me finish on the delivery channels, and then perhaps we'll swing back into that. Unless, Roland, does that make some sense? I think we'll do that if that's okay.
That sounds good. Yes.
Okay. Delivery channel number 3 is financial. Financial services on the sell side. we've been contributing to research on specific companies for folks. Folks can get again that specific company piece, but we've also, perhaps more importantly, been working with a major international financial institution to develop baskets of investment, both long and short, reflecting particular kinds of events, policy areas. The election was a big driver for us this last year, and I'd like to take, if we could, a little bit of a deeper dive in that. I'm going to reshare with our website, which has portions on that. And John, this may be where I ask you to kick in a little bit.
Sure.
Because one of the outcomes of that was these indices we developed about elections. As you see, every day for each U.S. company we do estimates of positive or negative exposure, and using rolling averages of these underlying policy company impacts with respect to those who might be beneficial of a Republican leaning portfolio or a Democratic leaning portfolio. We've both tracked that, and so we created a set of baskets that we felt were sensitive to those predictions about the election. John, would you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, sure. So kind of the underlying technology here is the ability to link policies to companies. And so we've been able to do that for, as Oliver mentioned, across thousands of policies and thousands of companies. What that allows us to do is then look at this historically and determine, based on those policies that were from a particular party, so Republican or Democrat, what were the companies that our analysis automatically determined as being positively impacted, and which ones would be negatively impacted from all of those historically proposed policies from that political party. And then what that allows us to do is then determine, assuming that going forward, the political parties themselves don't have widely varying stances on what types of policies and what types of companies would be impacted by those policies, then we can determine on a forward-looking basis what are the companies that are likely to do well or do poorly under that political party. And so what we're doing here is then we're able to determine that automatically every day, and going forward through time, you can see how it actually was able to pick up on these exposures. And if the value of one of these is going up, that means that the market is pricing in the probability that that political party will have more influence over future policy. And so we were doing that historically in 2016. We created the data in a way that we could go back and look at this point in time on a daily basis historically. And then we did that work historically, but we did it in 2019, and we did it before 2020 started. So that allowed us to say, okay, for next year, we could launch this in real time and have a live version of this. So in 2019, we launched that. And then in 2020, we had it running live, both for as sort of a website like this that people could look at, but then also as a real product that was an investable product. And we had billions of dollars traded on this by institutional investors. So they could hedge exposures, or they could take a view on what they think might happen. And as you can see, pretty early on, the Democrat index here was way above the Republican index, and that suggests that the market was already pricing in the probability being higher for Democrats to have more control than Republicans.
So, and as you can see, both if you invested, if you decided to go long Democrat this past year, you would have done pretty well with it. If you decided to go long Republican in 16, you would have done pretty well with it. The other interesting thing about this is the fact that the market, particularly here towards the end, right there in September, October, picks up Trump's win in a way that many others did not. At least from a standpoint of what's being indicated there.
Yeah.
So it's both interesting from a standpoint of as a predictor, a polling kind of device, but also very interesting if you're willing to take a bet one way or the other. This supplies you with a vehicle for making that bet with an outcome that is we think pretty closely linked to the actualities of Democrat and Republican government.
Yeah, so there was a question that I'll address now about someone asked, how do you make sure that it is particular policies that are affecting the companies positively or negatively and not other parameters that's not related to the policies? So that's a good question. The way that we deal with that is these are long, short portfolios. So each of these lines represents a separate long, short portfolio. So for example, that red line, that's equally long and equally short, and it's balanced enough across sectors and other factors that it is capturing just the spread, just the difference between how much those longs are going up compared to those shorts going down. And then that allows you to better isolate the impact of what you're trying to predict, as opposed to something like a traditional long only where it's just the long positions. Then you're just subject to all the other things that are moving the market as a whole. But here we're isolating that because we're equally long and equally short.
And because the long and the shorts effectively cover the market fluctuations, the volatility of the market, you do get you should, at least in theory, get an isolation of the main effect to a large degree at any rate.
But can I just ask so but that does that also explain that the fluctuation is or sort of the performance of a company as reflected in the stock market performance is a direct result of government policies, or can there be other factors too that may determine that?
There's certainly other factors. I mean, if the company is making money or losing money is clearly a dominant factor. But what we isolate out is this element in the pricing by the markets. This element has a direct effect as people anticipate that a particular law will have a particular effect, and it has a longer term effect as those policies actually do affect profitability or not. So there's a number of places where these come into play. Our trick is to try and as you can see, the market itself provided a dynamic this direction, and our trick is to try and help anticipate that by isolating the factors earlier than many come to be aware of them. So anyway, I think that this provides a good example of this, of what these things do. What criteria do you use in companies you add to your research? I don't think we've done the socially responsible index, John, but we have done instead. We have done these Democrat Republican shifts. We've talked about a number of different variable baskets. We actually have a couple of products out there that we're testing about other criteria for long short. You could go long short socially responsible if you wish. You could limit yourself to that, and then run the analytics to see what would be the predictions about a democratic policy on those companies. But again, there's all kinds of different ways you can slice and dice this data. The key piece is that ability to link the outcomes of the legislation to the predicted outcomes for the companies and other economic actors. All right. Let me see. I don't want to take up too much time. Okay. Moving forward. Going long. So someone asking going long. Going long means that you actually buy into the targeted stock. Going short means that you basically bet against it. And there are a number of different techniques besides buying the stock itself. You can use a bunch of different hedging devices of puts and calls to create these positions. So going long Democrat means we think the Democrats are going to win, and those. So if you went long Republican in 16, you could make some very significant money. Both before and then after the election, because it's interesting to see these effects continuing after the election. And in 2020, again, you could have made some nice money if you went long Democrat. Although it bounced around a bit. One of the effects of the Trump contesting of the election is that we saw some bouncing around as a result. Although it's come back up a bit as well.
So this is so you're not talking about this in sort of directly, going long on Democrats versus going long on Republicans, but going long on companies that would benefit from
a democratic administration
policies.
Exactly. From the legal and regulatory policies of those companies that have historically our historical analysis links to the kinds of policies that we would expect to be enacted by a Democratic or a Republican regime. Exactly.
So if you went long on sort of oil and gas companies, that's
oil and gas would probably be something to go short on in a Democrat policy than the last year. And I think that may well have been an element in some of what we're up to.
But did you also want to get back to the previous question?
Let me go back to my slides here, because in addition to that, I just wanted to do that as a deep dive. I wanted to have at least one sort of deep dive that we did. In addition, delivery channel number 4 has been supporting investment firms and systematic trading. We in addition to these kind of bespoke, customized policy-linked investment channels, we also, our daily feed we think has some significant aspects to it, and that daily feed we have been sharing, selling, basically licensing out to a variety of different investment firms and systematic trading things. It's not correlated with general market return. One of the things you saw in that is that because this particular signal is sort of independent of the general economic cycle. Folks like this because it gives them an opportunity to make money in an up market, make money in a down market, provided you've hedged in that way appropriately. We worked with several recipients with greater or lesser involvement. In some of the circumstances where we are aware of outcomes, we're not always aware of the outcome when we license. We found that this has helped the investment fund outperform the 2020 averages for similar funds and to produce double-digit returns over the past year. So at least over the past year, in those instances where the uses or things that we can track the methodology and the result, it has been shown a positive correlation in this area as well. So conclusions and next steps. This is our finish off here, and then we can take a few questions. Our conclusions include the fact that law and policy activities and the consequences of those activities can be usefully analyzed and tracked with sophisticated NLP and data analytics techniques. Conclusion number 1 is that there's enough good signal and good results from our predictions that we think that it's correct that these fields can be predicted. We're doing it. Others probably can, but it is a field where that is possible. Also, our own methodologies have been successful in providing a useful signal on our targeted activities, entities, and predictions. We would argue that we're well beyond now proof of concept or minimum viable product. We're doing this. This is a business, and we've had significant uptake and significant results from our activities. What is our next step? Some of our next steps are to broaden our targets jurisdictionally and by subject. So again, we are thinking about going international. There's language problems. There's different systems, all kinds of things. We've looked into the international, and it's sitting there waiting to be attacked. It's maybe one of the things we attack next. We are currently attacking the state level legislation in the U.S., where again our current methodologies apply fairly directly with less need to tailor. We're also thinking about broadening beyond politics, legislation, regulation, that kind of sphere. That is where our sweet spot is and has been. But again, the proof of concept on our methodologies lets us think that we can extend it in some other areas as well. Second, the next point is that law and policy questions have financial importance. This was, again, sort of Roland's point. It's not the only thing, obviously, governing financial performance, but it is a factor, and in some companies, a fairly significant one. Therefore, there's significant alpha opportunities, significant opportunities for us to find undiscovered trading value and surface that. And our next steps there is to explore enhanced ways to identify, share, and capture that alpha. So, as we move forward in our coming year, I think that those are certainly two of our principal next steps. As one of them, as I say, is broadening our approaches, and the second one is working on enhancing, identifying, sharing, and capturing that financial market. We don't want to be just limited to the financial market sphere, obviously, but we also feel that our effect has been successful there, and we'd like to continue. So if you want to talk further, happy to always be in touch. This is the Scopus Labs. John is, by the way, John at Scopus Labs, but be in touch with me on this if you'd like. And now we have, I hope, some time for some questions.
Thank you, Oliver. This is super interesting. So one question, did you do this for all publicly listed companies? And if so, what system did you use? Did you already use NLP to sort of map the specific policies and legislative proposals in Congress, to sort of the company's fields of activities? Is that already happening in an automated NLP assisted way, or is there a lot of kind of
the answer is yeah. We've used this NLP approach together with a lot of different data sources on the companies, and some of it is NLP analysis of their statements. Some of it is other data points about them, about their business. We use those to create an integrated representation, as I say, of the company, and that representation is one of our assets, because we have this representation of companies, which we can also perhaps extend into other spheres of analysis as well. So every publicly traded company in the United States, just about, I shouldn't say that because there's always some exception, but just about every publicly traded company in the United States, we have scraped, we've done we've constructed this representation, and that's what we then take back into our comparisons, to use that representation as a basis to make comparison to the representations of the law and regulatory activity. So yes, NLP and other machine learning techniques build from the ground up.
Yeah. I think you wanted to come back to Matthew's question too on how you handle legislation versus regulation.
Yep. Let's work our way back up a little bit if we can.
Yeah.
John, do you want to address that one?
Yeah, sure. So with legislation, it's, as Oliver alluded to, there's a more important problem to solve around the enactment probability, as opposed to regulation, where that's not as an important problem to solve in terms of what's the probability a proposed rule will be finalized. But we spent a lot of time on working on machine learning models to predict the probability of a proposed bill becoming an enacted bill, because only about 4% on the federal level are. The number is slightly higher on the state level, but that allows us to discount the potential impact of a policy, of a proposed bill, on industries and on companies based on given what that day is, what the probability of enactment is. On the regulatory side, we bring in the data from the 200 plus federal agencies in the US, where they all have proposed rules. And then as soon as it's a proposed rule, it's part of something that we're analyzing. So it's a much broader number of documents from a more diverse source than it is on the congressional side. So there's just a few interesting kind of differences between those two data sources. And I can answer some of these other questions too. Let me scroll through here. So the COVID-19 policies, right now we're limited to the US with our coverage of that, but you can find that website. If you go to scopuslabs.com, it'll be right there on the main page. It's coronavirus.scopuslabs.com. And we also track on their regulations and federal spending that's related to COVID. And someone else asked, how do you make sure the policies are affecting income? Oh, I already answered that.
Ljubomir's question, what is the proprietary distinctive feature of the NLP models used? Are they adaptable to other use cases?
Sure. Yeah. So Yeah, they are adaptable, but what is unique though about what we're doing right now is that we built it out it specifically for legislation and regulation. So we have people on our team that have a lot of expertise around that space, around legislation and regulation and legal documents in general. And so for example, we have one person on our team who did his whole PhD dissertation just on NLP for bills in Congress. And so he spent 5 years working on that. So we were able to leverage a lot of that work and then build out some proprietary ways of pre-processing all this data. So it's one thing to apply the natural language processing to the results of something, but to get it to the point where it's sectionized, you've removed anything that is really boilerplate. So the ability to determine what is legal boilerplate and what isn't is a big deal in this context. So we spent a lot of time doing that using some proprietary stuff that we developed over the past 4 years. So that's part of the edge there in terms of the proprietary nature of our NLP, but it is applicable to other things as well. Because as Oliver mentioned, we have to do this across all the company side and the industry side of things as well. And so we're using some of that similar methodology. So a lot of this is based on things like word vectors and topic modeling, but then adapting those methods to our use cases.
And as John is suggesting, the kind of the data curation that goes on is actually a lot of that is automated. So we can get one of the cleanest sets of data on federal regulatory enactment with commensurable data rather than each agency has its own format for doing, and we're able to strip that away and create something commensurable.
Cool. So Thabo and Nonopa asked about GP3. What's your thoughts on GP? How can GP3? What is your take on GPT-3 and the latest Google Switch C language? And can it be used to advance your analysis?
Yeah, I think over time we can begin to use methods like that. I mean, part of our problem we're solving, it's a combination of how much understanding can we map into the models of the data, balancing that with scalability, because we have to be able to apply this across, because if you think about it, there could be 5,000 or more bills, and then there could be 5,000 or more companies. So 5,000 times 5,000 is a large number in terms of possible permutations of what we're looking at on any given hour. So we have to be able to scale it when we deploy this pretty widely, and that makes it harder to do things like pure language models at scale. But I think through some other more specific applications of what we're doing, GPT-3 could be useful.
Okay. All right. Unfortunately, we have to wrap it up here. It's really fascinating what you guys are doing, and I want to also leave some time for Samantha to present her research. So we're a little bit over the hour already. So thank you so much, Oliver and John. And
you're very, very welcome. And as I said, we'd be happy to respond specifically to some questions later on. Right. Oliver at scopuslabs.com.
Great, folks. If you have more questions for Oliver and John, please reach out directly to them. And yeah, thank you again. It's really wonderful to get an update. It's really fascinating work, and please keep us posted.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
All right, thank you. So Samantha, you there?
I am here.
There you are. Okay, wonderful. So both presentations today are really focused on how NLP can be used in legal and policy settings. And so yours is more sort of an IP and innovation policy focused, and this is part of your research at Stanford Law School as a fellow at the Center for Law and the Biosciences. And yeah, I'll just turn it over to you, and we're excited to learn about your work.
Oh, thank you so much, Roland. I really appreciate the invitation. And Oliver and John, that is super cool. thank you so much for having me. Actually, what I'm going to present today is some of the work I've been doing here at both the Law and Biosciences Center and for Intellectual Property with Mark Lemley. But the project I'm going to talk about today is just to give you a sense of how we can use NLP as actual applications for current problems with the federal government that federal governments are facing. So last summer, me and my team actually got hired by the German federal government to help them understand what their innovative position is currently in CRISPR, which is the new DNA editing technology that I'm sure most people have heard of by now. But they didn't know where they sat, and they didn't know, what they were doing in comparison to the rest of the world, and they wanted some information to be able to make good policy. And actually, some of the work I'm going to show you today is actually going to be presented to Angela Merkel next month. And so far, they've been really happy with what's here. So really, it's quite simple, and it's something that's really very powerful. So I just wanted to kind of show this. But first, before before I go too far, I just want to talk really quickly about CRISPR in general and why we should even care about any of this. So CRISPR itself is the new DNA editing technology that truly is a revolution in how science is conducted. It is, it allows us to edit DNA cheaper, faster, easier, and pretty much more accurately than any other tool we've ever had available, and especially for any kind of mammalian cells. So like editing mice or, well, human embryos. But it's also changed entire industries like agriculture and livestock and biofuels. Really allowed us to understand human disease better, allows us to even lately start coming up with brand new therapeutics for treating things like sickle cell anemia. And this has been such a big deal that, as you may know, it now has a Nobel Prize, awarded less than 10 years after it was introduced. In 2020, and I give the German government actually a lot of kudos for starting this project before the Nobel was even awarded. So we started doing this sort of a year ago, give or take, finished the majority of it over the summer. And one of the reasons they had started to pick this up is that the amount of work that has been going on in CRISPR in terms of an innovative process and new ideas has utterly exploded since it was introduced in June 2012 up until the end of 2019, which is sort of where my data stops here. But you can see, in terms of, say, the number of papers written about CRISPR, we had 68 in 2012 and nearly 4,000 by the time 2019 ended. And even better yet, we see the same pattern with patent families. Now, I should note, this is actually really incredible to me because underlying all of this is a massive patent interference case, so that ownership of the original technology is even under debate. Yet, here we go. Patent families are just exploding everywhere. And I should note, these two slides that we've created are not cumulative. This is year by year. The exponential growth is astonishing. So the thing is, what the government wanted to understand, what the Germans wanted to understand was sort of, okay, so we know all this activity is happening, but where is it happening? Who's doing it? And really, what is our current competitive position? So that we can kind of come up with some ideas of what to tell people. And one of the problems, two of the problems that they introduced to us, one was, well, we need you to be able to classify these things so that you can compare papers and patents worldwide. And we need the classifications to be in a way that, like, the federal government understands who the stakeholders might be. So really what they wanted was a set of application areas. And what they asked me is like, how can we create these, application categories or application areas that can be interpreted consistently across CRISPR patents and papers, but still be used for useful policy recommendations? And to some degree, that's a bit of a heavy lift because there's some serious challenges to this. There are no predefined categorizations consistent for both patents and papers. Like each patents have IPC or CPC codes that are based on technological categories. Academic papers have Web of Science or mesh keyword terms, but these two things don't measure the same kinds of concepts. But one of the things we realized was that patents in general, because of what patents do, are easier to classify by certain industry application areas than scientific papers. So we wondered, is it possible to hand classify a bunch of patent information, train an NLP model on that, and then use that to classify paper applications using the same kind of vectors? And at least for broad categories in this specific technology, the answer turns out to be yes, which really is fascinating. So the method is super simple, and we had to keep it simple because we're giving this to a government who needs to be able to explain this and needs to be able to understand sort of what's going on under the hood, and B, we really don't have a lot of data. Right. So basically what we were able to do was we literally hand coded a set of CRISPR patent families. So I have about 4,000 families altogether. So we hand classified about 2,000 of them, and I can get into kind of how we did that later. Other than I've been studying CRISPR since 2014, so I have a really good sense of like what each patent is doing. But we did hand read them. And then what we did was use the titles, abstracts, and the now categories we've assigned that were useful to our clients, as as a patent training set. And so, what we used was Python, actually. It's scikit-learn, and really simple. We converted the raw text to a matrix of TF-IDF features and used a regularized model with stochastic gradient descent learning. And then we used a log loss function. So what we were able to do is then apply this trained model to the original test data. And then use the trained model on the titles and the abstracts of the remaining CRISPR patents and the unclassified papers. And what we, and basically what we did was we said, okay, we assigned everything a dominant category. You can have secondary categories, but the dominant category is going to be the one that has the highest probability over the 4 categories we defined, and they'll all sum to 1 because of the the loss function, the log loss function we used. And what we found is these models are pretty accurate. I mean, we guessed that would be pretty true, given that the intercoder reliability for classifying the training set of patents was already quite high. And what we found is you can actually accurately predict the dominant category between 65 and 80% of the time across different folds of the model. The model we ended up using, though, when we took the remaining patents and did a hand check of a random sample of it, we realized assigning things to a dominant category, it was about 73% accurate. If we allowed for a secondary category, then it would be about 93% accurate. Doing the same thing with papers resulted in very similar accuracy counts. So we were quite shocked this works. But what's cool, and actually, Jana, I will do that right now. So we were able to do, so what I'm going to show you really quickly is some of the data we were able to show them by doing this. And so the categories were sort of the main ones that were developed by talking to scientists, my my years and years of research on the social science of CRISPR, and sort of discussing with folks who work in this field. And the 4 main categories that have happened early on were industrial applications, things like biofuels and yogurts, which is actually one of the places CRISPR was first developed, agriculture and livestock, health and medicine, and then like all good new scientific tools, there's a lot of work on the improvement of the tool itself. So there isn't a specific application, but just we're going to make this tool more accurate or optimize it or do things like that. So these were our 4 broad categories, but they're fairly distinct. And so especially among patents. And so what you can see is exactly what I knew was going on in the zeitgeist at the time was patents first started with technical improvements because that's what you could patent. That's the fastest thing to get out. But then all of a sudden you start to see an explosion in health and medicine patents because, people knew that's where the money was going to be and that's where the focus was. And if we, back this up, because patents always, show up a little bit later than papers, you can actually see if we shift the time frame a little earlier, same thing happens, but pretty soon what starts to happen is health and medicine papers now sort of take over. Just to technical improvements, because once in 2014, we found out that CRISPR was just as good, if not better than anything else. All of a sudden people are like, oh my gosh, look at the 100 million things we could possibly do in the medicine field that we were literally not capable of. And this is what you're seeing. And again, what's cool about this is it's more or less what I expected to see, even though the papers themselves were not, were only categorized by the model. We had no priors, no expectations, in the model that said that it should look like this. And then what's even cooler is by being able to sort of do these common categorizations, we've been able to also assign countries to the owners of patent families and to papers. And so then now what we can do is sort of compare people's positions in a particular field, within the same time period. And what you can see from things like this is, 70% of all agriculture and livestock patent families are held by people from owners from China. In contrast, health and medicine and technical improvements, are mostly patented from folks from the US. And what's super interesting about this is it completely follows the patterns of the development of the tool itself. So CRISPR was founded in the US, and so most of the tool improvements did indeed happen here. And then it was because it was being developed in Berkeley and Silicon Valley and in and in Kendall Square, the major focus on a lot of our entrepreneurship was in health and medicine in this space. Whereas in contrast, in China, they actually, I don't have this chart for you today, but they actually had a delayed entry into CRISPR at all. And it was because the Chinese 5-year plan 5 years ago basically stated, we are going to become, the dominant source for new papers and patents in gene editing, especially in agriculture. And all of a sudden, this is what you see. And again, you can see sort of similar patents happening in papers, although certain things like the European Union all of a sudden have more of a tendency to publish and say industrial applications than they did patent. So this is a very simple example of something that has been a real powerful tool to be able to show people where they fit very broadly in the in their own innovative competitive position, and it allows us to tell, especially Germany in this case, them where they were strong, where they were probably weaker than other people. And we were able to provide a set of recommendations for them that I said will, as I mentioned, will be brought to them later next month. So I'll stop there for questions. But thank you again so much for your attention. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Sam. This is very cool, and I think Angela Merkel will really enjoy that, given that she's a scientist. She will actually be able to follow your presentation. So when you say patent families, then you're talking about sort of groups of patents that were applied, where the invention is based on the use of the CRISPR technology. There's no patent on the CRISPR technology itself, right? The CRISPR is sort of a, or is there?
Yes, no, that's exactly it, right? So basically, when we talk about a patent family, right, for a CRISPR innovation, each one is going to be, well, you hope anyway, a distinct new idea that that is patentable multiple places in the world, right? And so it took us a long time to actually figure out how to do this. So we had to pull every single patent family that could possibly be associated with CRISPR, and we hand read them. I had a very large team, so we're fairly confident that the things that we're even classifying in the first place absolutely have to do with CRISPR being used, in a specific novel way in one of these fields.
And Jana is asking, can you give some examples of categories?
Right. So the categories were the ones I showed everybody, which were, like I said, the dominant ones in CRISPR, and this has been verified with scientists and with people who've been watching the field for a long time. Is it starts in technological improvement to the tool itself. It then moved into industrial applications. So it started with yogurt. Now we've got biofuels. There are a few even now that are trying to figure out, and this is actually a patent, trying to figure out how to use the CRISPR to store actual information, like films, into DNA. It's absolutely fascinating. So we've got all sorts of random stuff like that. And then the big, huge ones are going to be agriculture, which truly is going to be the first place that CRISPR explodes as a commercial system. And then health and medicine, as everybody would expect. So that's usually what people talk about. CRISPR.
Jana, I see your hand raised. Jana, did you want to ask a follow-up question?
Actually, I asked that question before Samantha gave, so she already showed the categories. But since we are on this question, if you were to have more granular categories, do you think the TF-IDF would work? Because TF-IDF is definitely better than keyword search, but it's still a shallow technique to categorize. So you. I mean, in a sense that it won't be able, probably, I don't know, I don't have any idea. I mean, are you thinking of making comparisons with other techniques for more granular categories or no?
So at the moment, no, although for my own personal research, probably. We didn't want to go more granular, because as you point out, it is fairly shallow, but we also just didn't have a ton of data, right? So the more granular we went, any model is going to have a problem.
True.
Right? At that point, you're no better than me literally hand coding everything, in which case, but you're right. We did this because we didn't want to just do keywords, because that's, you missed it.
TF-IDF is better, but maybe as well the techniques that John and Oliver were using, like topic modeling, and I think they were using something else like representing the actual text, might be useful in your case too. Their technique.
It definitely could. Again, some of that we were dealing with data limitations. So like for papers, for example, all I really have is the abstract and the title.
Yeah.
Right. And so ideally, I'd love like the entire text of the paper. We can do this with patents though. So there may be something where, well, actually, hold on. I am going to back this statement up. So you can do it within patents for sure. The complication I have with using all of the patent to then try to create more granular fields to then apply to papers is that the language that's used in the claims and describing a patent then ends up being really different. And the one reason our method works is because, especially in this field, the way that abstracts are written in the patents and in the papers actually are a lot more similar.
So you're talking about the Chinese and English, or you're talking about the actual expression of the language?
Right. because the way patents are written, you know, they're written in legalese.
Yeah, okay. And did you have multilingual also?
Yes, I have multilingual, except that the vast majority of these things have been translated into English, at least the abstracts.
Okay, thank you.
So we're pretty confident we've got almost everything.
Because for the multilingual, sorry, you could use sequence alignment, which is actually DNA sequencing to solve the problem of multilinguality. So it would be independent of the language. You could actually use DNA technique itself comparison. Anyway, that just a thought. Thank you.
Nope. Thank you. That's really cool. Thank you. I'll look into that.
I was asking, does this improve? I think you talked about that already, but does it improve in any way existing patent search tools using keywords and latent semantics?
So it depends on what you're looking for, right? So I think it does improve it in terms of, like I said, looking for sort of these categories where we can start to really pinpoint who might be the stakeholders. Like, so if I say, you know, this is agriculture, like we have a general sense of what that means, and it allows me to kind of say something, it allows me to a little more wiggle room in case agriculture is slightly different in Germany than it is in the US, which it clearly is. But at least we know who we're talking about and comparing to. Does it do any better than just IP, how we've been doing IP in general? Probably not, actually. It's just, like I said, it's because the models and the keywords and the technical categorizations that we have for patents within patents are designed for that. So I think this is a different way to classify. I don't know that I would argue that it's necessarily better.
Mm-hmm. Good. All right. So then, yeah, both Thabo and Stephanie have praise for your presentation. This is amazing. Terrific presentation. Mark is saying, could this be used to make an IP claim against the drafter of an academic paper if the research later becomes a product based on the patent that is dominantly associated with that paper using this tool, and thus risk stifling academic publication?
That's an interesting question. I don't actually know. I don't think so. But I think it'll depend on timing, right? So I don't think it would ever stifle publication if the paper itself, like usually what happens is this, right? Is that folks have written a paper and they'll have the patent application based on a particular paper, or they'll reference a set of papers on which the technology is built. So the papers usually tend to, you know, agree first. As long as the paper doesn't, as long as the new paper doesn't just completely just reiterate what's in a patent, and it is something new, you know, there's no particular reason that should stifle academic publication, just as you know, even as a point of law. But I'd also argue, just from a threat standpoint, no one's gonna sue, you know, an academic. No one's going to sue an academic for publication. It would only be if, you know, I have a publication, I now try to create a product based on that publication. The product itself then infringes on on an older patent, right? Then we're going to get into it. But you know, I don't see that as the case.
Okay. All right, then Anya is sort of asking me, you know, what's a question for me? Did you choose these two projects to be presented on the same day purposefully? Is there a possibility to predict what patents we might see in the future based on tools that Oliver and Sam have now presented? So on the timing of the presentations, that's more a function of you know, our speakers' availability, and I think Susan has arranged the timing, you know, and I would maybe submit that Susan has purposefully put the two NLP presentations together on the day.
Yeah, I wish I could claim such brilliance, but mostly, not always, these are just amazingly random coincidences.
Yeah. Okay, and then is it possible to predict what patterns we might see? So there are, I think, I'm not sure if I should let Sam answer that question, but I'm aware of some other projects that were trying to, you know, to predict, you know, sort of areas or fields of patent activity based on seeing sort of clusters of new patents that sort of suggest that a certain innovation path is forming in a particular area. There's a gentleman out of, what's his name, Ken Young, who's a professor, I think American professor at Lausanne Polytechnique. He's done some research on that using a machine learning model, but I don't know, Sam, do you have any thoughts on that?
I'll have to think about that. I'd be more than happy to, like, that one I have to, I don't want to answer off the top of my head. But I'd be more than happy to chat with anybody, you know, further about this. Actually, here, let me put my email in the chat.
And this is Susan. While Sam's doing that, I might chime in because this might be relevant to a couple of questions. I just have a casual interest in this idea of combining papers and patents, and there are databases that do this. So I think this is becoming more of an established approach, is to look at both types of corpora to see what you can, what kind of insights you can glean from that analysis.
Yep, that I agree with. Like this is definitely an area that is getting very hot. But again, like we always have to be a little careful about under what purpose any categorization is created and what it's used for and what it is useful for. Which is one of the big policy points I tend to always like to make, is just because there is a categorization doesn't mean it's something that's useful for your client.
Okay, so then let me see. Well, Nonopa is asking, what's the legal position on Mark's question anyway? So I'm not sure actually, you know, what the legal grounds would be if you had a patent, then to you know, if you get a patent, then it's published, right? And that's the point of the patent. And you can keep others from practicing a patent, but I don't think you could keep others from discovering and writing and publishing about it.
No, and certainly we've seen that, right? I mean, it is one of the reasons we're having an issue over CRISPR. Like, two people have discovered the same thing at the same time, just slightly differently. But the argument isn't over the papers.
Right. I think, you know, maybe I think sort of back to the old debate around sort of research tools, right? And patenting of research tools. If you have a patent on a research tool and you might not be licensing, you know, or you might only license it on sort of very expensive terms, then that might chill innovation, right? Because people, you know, research labs might not be able to get that important tool to further their research. I think that is one of the concerns, but I don't know about, I actually don't know the context on how CRISPR actually, what the patents are, or specifically on the technology itself and how this is licensed. I think that's
right. Well, actually, ironically enough, that is literally the paper I'm working on now. That I didn't present today, but the licensing web behind CRISPR is actually quite extensive, because certainly for Cas9, which is the main one everybody knows, although as Scott points out in the chat, now that I've gotten a chance to read it, is there actually are a zillion different versions of CRISPR now. But what's interesting about this is the fights over Cas9, which is the one that cuts, but the patents themselves actually only cover the CRISPR tool with the Cas9 enzyme, the pair of scissors, which means that it's very possible that any other tool that uses a different enzyme. So for example, there's a CRISPR Cas12 or 13, which are being used for diagnostics for COVID right now. That's a different tool and may not be involved in this patent fight at all. And so like there are actually design around options. And so one of the interesting things I'm poking at right now is trying to figure out, did people actually move to these other options faster because they just didn't want to deal with Cas9 anymore? Right. And so like, yeah, maybe we blocked up a little bit of innovation, but as I've shown you here, I don't think so, because people are just going through with it anyway. And it may have it may have encouraged a lot of design around. So we're gonna check into that.
We're already a little bit of our time, but maybe Nonopa is raising her hand, and maybe for quick final question, Nonopa, you wanna just maybe add to your previous question?
I was asking if what if it's the other way around? Let's say an academic writes something and then someone reads the paper and then creates a product on based on the academic's research.
Well,
and it's exactly the same, let's say.
Then it would be a prior publication. That would be that would mean that it's not then it's not novel, and the patent office should not be issuing a patent.
Yeah, novelty. Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Okay, well, good. Well, that was a quick one. So, all right. Well, good to see you all. Thank you, Samantha, for your fantastic presentation and your super interesting research. And then Oliver and John, also thanks for your fantastic presentation and all of your amazing and important work. And please keep us posted. And we're going to be meeting again. Susan, are we meeting next week?
Next week we are meeting. Yep.
Okay, same time, same channel. So please come back. Thank you all for coming, and stay safe. Good to see you all. All right. Thank you. All right. Take care, guys.